Kaikeyi, Chapter 10. The battlefield overwhelmed me. The horses had been trained for war, but I was unprepared. The moment the archers began shooting, any semblance of my control slipped away. The neat lines of men broke into chaos, assaulting my senses. The screams of men dying, the scent of blood, it churned my stomach, and I slackened my grip dangerously. I forgot my lessons with Yutajit and my drills with Ashwasin. I breathed through my mouth, trying to get calming air into my lungs, but my body had seized with panic. The horses slowed, making us a target. I watched a few men turn to us, readying their spears. It was this fear that finally penetrated through the haze, somewhat clearing my head. I spurred the chariot onward, my shaking hands pulling the horses into an arc. Dasharath leaned out of the bay, the powerful strokes of his khanda cutting through three of Sambarasura's men. "Excellent, Kaikeyi!" he shouted at me. I would have responded, but the battlefield was rapidly devolving into a tangle I could not pass. As the long yellow grass was trampled into a mess of matted red, as bodies fell, and the rising dust coated the men on foot in a haze of grey, it became impossible to discern our formations, let alone who held the upper hand. The glint of a spear cut toward me. I jerked the reins in a panic, and Dasharath gave a shout of surprise behind me. Icy fear coursed through my veins and shook my hands, and the noise of the battle and sounds of death became too much to bear. I turned this way and that, desperate for a reprieve, and nearly drove our chariot over a group of our own men. An arrow flew past the horses, and although they were well trained beasts of war, the horses reared up. I pulled them all in, bringing us to a near standstill, when another arrow came whistling through the air, shearing through my sleeve. I barely felt the sting of it, for I was driving the team forward again, trying to keep my head. Dasharath, for his part, did not shout out angered instructions, but I could feel his frustration radiating from behind me. He threw another spear, but I twisted the chariot at the last moment, and we both watched as it went wide. "I'm sorry," I shouted, knowing it was absolutely inadequate. Words were meaningless right now. He needed action. I scanned the battlefield, trying to pick out places where our men were struggling or locate Sambarasura's own chariot, but I was so disoriented that my vision blurred. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I dashed them away with my hand, ignoring the sharp pain in my arm at the motion. Yet another spear came towards me, and Dasharath drove to one side of the chariot to avoid it, for I was too slow. We tilted precariously as I fought for control, both of the team and myself. An arrow embedded itself in the chariot's rail next to me, inches higher, and it would pierced my husband. My heart beat so hard I thought I felt faint from the force of it. My failures were putting my husband, my Raja, and maybe even my friend in danger. Right now I was responsible for his life, and I was getting nowhere in this panicked, frenzied state. So I stopped. For just a brief moment, I brought our chariot to a standstill, closed my eyes, and filled my lungs with air. As my heart calmed, I opened my eyes and entered the binding plane, muttering the mantra to myself for the first time in years. As I gazed across the battlefield, I saw the faint gossamer threads that connected me to Dasharath's men, and I saw the places where there were no threads at all. I heard Dasharath inhale sharply behind me, but before he could speak, I set us back in motion. This time I was grounded, focused. While I could not tell the soldiers apart visually, I used the binding plane to steer us to a group of men who lacked any connection to me at all. As we approached, I was able to differentiate their mismatched armor from that of our own soldiers, and I let out a bark of triumph and laughter. Dasharath expertly launched a spear at the man in front, then drew his khanda, slashing with speed and precision. He gave a whoop as his blade connected, and then I pivoted the chariot so that it collided with another two soldiers. Something crunched and I flinched, but Dasharath shouted, "Well spotted," and urged us on. There was no time to think, let alone to question the way I had just crushed the life out of a man. I blocked out everything but the plane, seeking out new gaps to pursue. We took down knot after knot of enemy, and I grew more confident, bringing us to the edge of clashes to the aid of our men. My blood sang with the cruel work, and Dasharat's weapons brutalized Sambarasura's army. A spear rammed hard into the side of a chariot. Dasharat stumbled, and this time it took him several moments to regain his balance. As I twisted around to check on him, I realized I was wasting time. I was helping our men, yes, but the battle would only end when Sambarasura was defeated. I kept the chariot moving at a steady pace, searching for only one man who mattered. Fallen standards kept catching my eye, but none of them were Sambarasura's. Of course, he had not fallen. We would not be so lucky. Nor his men still fighting were that the case. Some banners still whipped in the wind, but most were our own, the brilliant gold stark against the pale sky. Dasharat's men were gaining the upper hand, and the field was scattered with broken chariots. For several moments, my focus was fully directed to navigating around the dead and the dying. It was almost frightening how quickly I had acclimated to the suffering. I lifted my gaze once more, sweeping across the battlefield, and something caught my eye. I flicked the reins, pushing the horses to move more quickly, and a standard came fully into view. It was enemies, embroidered with the snarling face of a tiger, but dyed in deep green that made it stand apart. Sambarasura. We raced towards him, and I knew that Dasharath immediately understood my plan. He loosed an arrow at Sambarasura that barely missed where the enemy's charioteer swerved at exactly the right moment. We careened towards each other, and just as I put Dasharath within spear range of Sambarasura, our opponent hurled his own with a triumphant cry. The spear glanced off one of our wheels with a crack, and the horses reared in fear. I do not think it would be arrogant to say that with my driving, Dasharath's chariot itself had become a brutal weapon. Sambarasura had not been trying to kill us, not yet. He had been trying to stop us. "Get down!" I cried, all decorum lost in the face of danger. I crouched low as the horse's hooves churned the ground. "I am not a coward," he called back. He drew his khanda with a rasp of steel. "Get down," I repeated, but he was a Raja under no obligation to listen to his charioteer or his wife. Sambarasura's chariot raced towards us. The warlord hefted another spear in his hand, and with a great cry sent it soaring through the air. Time seemed to slow, then came rushing back far too quickly. "Never take your eyes off your enemy," Yutajit's voice cried in my ears, so I did not turn to help Dasharath. Instead, as Sambarasura drew closer, preparing to finish us, I pulled off my helmet for a better view of the whole field. I could see his eyes now and watched with a grim sense of satisfaction as they widened in surprise. A woman charioteer was not a common sight, and then he made his last mistake. He hesitated. "Take the opening," Yutajit said, but I did not need his advice. Holding the reins of the horses firmly in my left hand, I reached behind me and grabbed the smooth wooden shaft of one of Dasharath's mighty spears. Relying on instinct and the muscle memory of years of old lessons, I adjusted my grasp on the haft. Finding the center of gravity, I threw my breath rushing out of me in a shout. By the time obsidian-tipped death found Sambarasura, piercing his neck and shoulder in a deadly blow, I had jumped down from my injured husband's chariot to examine the damage, conscious it was our only form of escape. My hands shook as I examined the smashed wheel, 2 spokes broken, the whole thing fallen off its axis. Steel clanged behind me, the shouts of fighters mixing with the cries of dying men. My magic could not help me now. "Indra, please," I whispered, desperate. Indra was the god of charioteers and had long been considered a protector of Koshala. Perhaps he would help me save a favored Raja. "Guide my hand." No inspiration struck me. Maybe the gods were pushing me for joining the fight after all, and Dasharath, he might already be dead. I grabbed the bottom of the wheel and tugged with all my strength, trying to push it back into place. My shoulder blade pressed back into the splintered spoke. I strained with the effort, eyes clenched shut, until a battle cry sounded too near for comfort. "Never take your eyes off your enemy." I opened my eyes as the wheel popped back into place. A soldier lunged towards me, sword ready. I rolled out of the way. and he buried his blade into the earth as I swung myself back into the charioteer's seat. If only Yuddhajit could see me now, he would laugh and call me agile as a monkey for clambering back up so quickly. I spared a moment of gratitude for my brother's words. Then I snapped the horses into motion, barely hearing the soldiers scream beneath the wheels as I carved a path away from the battlefield, my mind fixed firmly on my husband. Dasharat's troops parted for me like ghee on a warm summer day. An observant rider outstripped me, racing back to camp. In the broken chariot, it took us several precious minutes in which I felt as though, with every breath, I was the one bleeding and not my husband. If he died in a chariot I drove into battle, they might as well put me on the pyre with him. I pulled up into the middle of camp and healers swarmed before I completely stopped. Is he alive? I asked, leaping onto the dirt, uncaring of who might witness my unwomanly behavior. Their chattering overlapped into an undecipherable din. I slipped into the binding plane and studied the fragile ties binding me to the men around me. The threads were thin, brittle, and dull, besides, as though I was trapped in an aged wheel. Magic would not work. Is my husband alive? I made each word ring like metal blades. The Raja's retinue all turned to me with varying expressions of confusion, contempt, and horror. A small man next to Dasharat's prone form nodded. Yes, Rajni, he still draws breath. The work resumed, but now the advisors encircled me. What happened? One demanded. Sambarasura cracked one of the chariot's wheels, and in the ensuing confusion his spear struck. And where is Sambarasura now? This voice I knew. Virendra, the Minister of War. He was Dasharat's favourite adviser. The string between us was orange, made thicker than the rest through familiarity. Dead, I said, turning to face him. The Raja slew him before succumbing to his wounds. The lie was easy. I felt as though I prepared my whole life to tell it. Their discussion subsided as they stared. How did you escape? Another asked. I jumped down from the chariot and pushed the wheel back into place, I said, and then I brought him here immediately. In the corner of my eye, I saw the healers lift the Raja onto a hammock and carry him off to another tent. You? The advisor said, pulling my attention back. He looked me up and down, just as Asha had that morning, and whereas I had felt at ease under Asha's gaze, under his I felt disgusting. His mouth pulled into a slight grimace. How could you fix the wheel of a war chariot? I prayed to Indra and he guided my hand. Another lie, the only one that would quiet them. For of course the gods would assist in saving their beloved Raja. Accepting that as truth, they turned away from me and followed Dasharath into the tent. So that's the end of chapter 10. I find this a really sad chapter, as we can see how Kaikeyi has to lie and hide her own victory on behalf of gaining favor in the court. It pretty much, I think, sets the mood of the entire story and the struggles of women back in the day.